Hey everyone, my name is Athanasios Bonas, and I have two academic publications on ancient Hellenic Pankration and boxing. It is my most recent study that I was waiting to be published prior to making this video. I speak of my newest article on the hand strike techniques of ancient Hellenic boxing and Pankration. In this study, my goal was to conduct the first large-scale pottery analysis, and in doing so prove that there are repeating patterns on the vase depictions that will provide consistency to interpreting what the images show. Indeed, there are patterns and tells for each technique that are remarkably consistent across 3 centuries of vase depictions, from 600 BC to 300 BC. I still have a few links to an open version of this article on Patreon if you're interested in reading it. Having this article published allows me to have a bit more authority in the disputations that I'm going to provide for this video, but I will approach this as I would if I were conducting a peer review. It may come out harsh or blunt, but this is not done out of disrespect, quite the opposite. I believe that it would be more disrespectful and more patronizing if I were to do the typical diplomatic response of trying to soften my criticisms. Whether right or wrong, I respect the effort they've put into their work and wish more people would undertake such studies. Now, this is from ACTA Vidéos. I believe they are French, but I am not sure what ACTA exactly stands for, if it is an acronym. Mind you, I do not speak French and will be going off the subtitles that they have provided in their video. It goes without saying that I will be pausing constantly, so you can find the link to the original video in the description. Give them a like too.
Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur ACTA Vidéos. Depuis une vingtaine d'années, nous travaillons sur diverses pratiques historiques, des pratiques culturelles, sportives ou martiales, comme les sports olympiques ou les combats de gladiateurs qui sont nos spécialités. La particularité de notre travail, c'est que nous nous appuyons sur un processus expérimental pour développer nos gestes et nos connaissances.
Here's the problem with experimentation. It's very much reliant on the fundamentals of the practitioners or the people studying it. What one person thinks would work, another would not. Also, there are certain aspects of combat that the ancients would know how they work, and today we wouldn't know because they haven't been tested on a large scale. Hence, it is better to focus on studying the archaeological findings thoroughly first. When these have been studied and analyzed, then you can begin experimenting through competitions. And mind you, 1, 2, 5, or 10 competitions will not prove if something works or not. The same way that flipping a coin a few times will not always provide an indicative result of the fact that the statistical success of heads should be 50%.
On en parle souvent comme étant l'ancêtre de la boxe. Si ce n'est pas complètement faux, on va voir que dans les détails, ce n'est pas si simple. Les recherches et études que nous avons menées sur le sujet nous montrent que c'est assez éloigné de ce qu'on pourrait imaginer de prime abord. Prenons l'exemple de la fresque crétoise dite des boxeurs, qui date d'environ 1500 avant Jésus-Christ. Nous avons ici une très belle source de l'époque minoenne. Il va falloir essayer de comprendre, et vous allez voir que ce n'est pas si évident. Alors, regardons ça d'un peu plus près.
Trying to find a technique from a single painting like this will usually not work, simply because the sample size of Minoan paintings displaying combat sports or boxing in particular is too small. And when I say too small, I mean there's just one.
La question est, comment pouvons-nous interpréter la position des combattants et par conséquent en déduire un geste technique dédié au pugilat? Essayons. Dans un premier temps, voici ce qu'ont imaginé les archéologues. 2 pugilistes qui se frappent en même temps au visage.
Already, the recreation is incorrect. The fighters in the painting have an upright posture, and they are not standing in a slanted stance. The fighter on the right does not have his legs crossed. All 4 feet and the hips are pointing forwards, not at an angle. The fist does not appear to be landing in the painting. In fact, we don't even know if it's a strike at all. That's the interpretation of the archaeologist, who likely knows little to nothing about boxing or combat sports. The fighter on the right is parrying the punch of the left combatant, as it makes no sense to strike with the ungloved hand. Also, there is an assumption here that the fighter on the right is striking with a horizontally oriented fist, whereas we cannot tell from the painting. It might seem like I'm nitpicking, but when it comes to interpretations, details are everything.
Pourquoi pas? Mais cela nous pose plusieurs problèmes.
Déjà, ils se frappent en même temps, ce qui potentiellement peut amener un double KO, ce qui n'est pas vraiment l'effet recherché dans un combat.
This statement is entirely incorrect. In fact, a counterpuncher will strive to strike when the opponent is also striking in order to land the counterpunch. Not to mention that sometimes both fighters just end up striking at the same time and trading, which is usually a spectacular moment, one that someone would want to try and depict. That being said, they are not even considering the possibility of that actually being a parry.
Bref, de cette source seule, on n'y comprend pas grand-chose. Heureusement pour nous, l'Antiquité nous a laissé bien d'autres sources, de différentes formes. Ce n'est ni plus ni moins que le poète antique Virgile qui va nous aider.
Virgil is a Roman era poet, so now we are conflating Roman boxing with Minoan boxing, which predates it by over 1600 years.
Il nous dit textuellement dans les Énéides que les boxeurs ont leurs poings qui passent et repassent autour de leurs tempes et de leurs oreilles. Alors attention, cela n'a rien à voir avec une danse démodée dont nous tairons le nom, ou d'une pratique un petit peu bizarre qui consisterait à se frotter les oreilles énergiquement jusqu'à l'énervement d'un des deux boxeurs. Oui, il y a bien quelqu'un qui l'a interprété comme ça.
What Virgil is talking about is probably them moving their own hands to the guard, which will rub the ears and temples. But that's neither here nor there when we're talking about Minoan art.
Maintenant que nous avons ce texte en tête, on va le laisser de côté pour se concentrer sur les sources directes que nous ont laissées les pugilistes.
Les imantes, ou les cestes pour les Romains, sont ces fameux gants en cuir utilisés au pugilat.
These are Roman era gloves, 117 to 119 CE, so they are not ancient Greek imandes, nor are they so-called the oxys imandes, which they wear throughout the video, and neither of these three have anything to do with Minoan boxing.
Les plus vieilles sont de simples lanières de cuir, venant protéger la main, le poignet et le début de l'avant-bras. Les plus récentes, par contre, sont des manchons en cuir rembourrés avec un boudin en cuir pour protéger les métacarpes.
The imandes were not really wrapped like that, but you can't expect them to know how they were wrapped. When worn in Pankration, they would only tie the hand so as to support the wrist, while in boxing, they would wrap the entire fist and knuckles. Hence why on depictions, the hands would look like spheres.
Au point où ces protections ont amené à développer des gestes et des postures bien adaptés.
Prenons des gants de boxe modernes. Ils sont bien rembourrés, protègent les phalanges, les métacarpes, et aussi le visage, quand on se place dans cette position de garde bien connue, où on va utiliser le rembourrage des gants pour encaisser les coups.
Par contre, si nous avons des imantes sur les mains, cette position ne marche plus. Regardons.
These padded gloves were introduced in the late Classical to early Hellenistic era, so in the late 4th century BCE. They were not named imandes. In fact, we do not know what they were called, and they're not identical to the reinforced leather gloves that they wear throughout the video. There did exist a specific type of padded glove used for training called sphère, as mentioned by Plato, but no surviving example of these exists. Maybe they're these?
Les mains ne sont pas entièrement protégées. Si on adopte la position du boxeur d'aujourd'hui, l'adversaire n'a qu'à pousser nos mains vers notre tête pour qu'on se frappe nous-mêmes.
Not sure targeting the hands with the palm is a prime target, and the original gloves did have much more padding, fleece padding in particular, so more than just the thick leather that we see them wearing here.
Donc, on ne peut pas se satisfaire d'une garde moderne pour le pugilat.
Gloves of this style were likely not used in the Olympics. The only vases we have that show these gloves are from Panathinaik Games, so the Athenian Games. And what's funny is, only in these vase depictions where padded gloves appear do we find a guard position akin to the one in modern boxing.
Les Grecs et les Romains nous ont laissé suffisamment d'iconographie pour qu'on puisse retrouver la bonne position de garde. Celle-ci, dans les textes, est nommée probolé, ce qui veut dire projeté, ou bien les mains jetées vers l'avant.
This is correct, but he's showing a vase displaying pankration, not boxing. Provoli just means projection, and it's mentioned in ancient texts in the context of Pankration as well. It refers specifically to the extension of the lead, but I will 100% give them props for using the proper ancient Hellenic term.
Cette garde consiste à tendre les bras devant soi, dans le prolongement du visage, afin de maintenir l'adversaire à bonne distance pour se protéger. On va ainsi former un cône de protection, à partir duquel on va pouvoir attaquer et se défendre dans une gestuelle qu'on va voir assez spécifique.
Rarely do vase depictions show both hands up like this. In fact, I'd say none have both fists out and touching, especially not in boxing.
D'après les sources, nous avons pu déterminer plusieurs attaques différentes. La première, nous l'avons appelée fendant. On vient armer le poing gauche ou droit à côté de notre oreille, le coude plié devant notre nez.
The depiction here is a Dracula guard from a square stance versus a simple long guard from a bladed stance. The fighter on the left has not tightened the guard because they are squaring off. He is not defending yet. The fist is not quote-unquote armed, it is guarding. Normally that hand is open in this stance so as to catch a strike, and it's used identically today in Muay Thai. The stance also includes lowering the head so the chin is tucked in to protect it from uppercuts.
Et on le déplie pour frapper notre adversaire au visage ou ailleurs. Il n'y a pas d'interdiction à ce sujet.
This is not how hammer fists were executed. Hammer fists have unique characteristics to them that are consistent throughout centuries. They only appear when the offhand guard is lowered and sometimes extended all the way to the back. Otherwise, the guard is always high. The reason for this is because the hammer fist required every single motion necessary to add weight to it. It was meant to be a high-risk, high-reward maneuver. Otherwise, shooting a hammer fist from the guard would be a high-risk, low-reward technique, which leaves you open while doing nominal damage to the opponent even if it lands. Every single hammer fist depiction, again through centuries of vase paintings, has the offhand lowered or extended behind the attacker for this reason, and they are often used to break the Dracula guard, which does not protect the top of the head.
La deuxième, c'est le coup du marteau. Un coup vertical, de haut en bas, qui vise plus à abaisser la garde de l'adversaire qu'à l'assommer.
Again, they are conflating Pankration and boxing and also conflating ancient Greek and Roman depictions.
L'un des bras est armé derrière la tête pour envoyer un coup direct. L'autre bras est au contact de l'adversaire pour le maintenir à distance.
This odd technique appears nowhere in ancient Hellenic vases.
Sur chacun de ces coups, les angles d'attaque peuvent varier et les combattants peuvent cibler toutes les parties du corps. Ainsi, les pugilistes peuvent frapper sous la ceinture, mais aussi au dos ou sur la nuque. Néanmoins, la tête reste une zone privilégiée.
Techniques or sequences with two separate timings are usually entirely impractical. Also, there are neither vase depictions nor texts that state that boxers were allowed to strike the legs. It is most likely that strikes below the belt were entirely prohibited in boxing. Also, no evidence of striking the back, and I'm afraid that what they're doing here goes against the entire spirit of combat sports in ancient Greece. When it comes to warfare, the Greeks focused heavily on practicality. These sequences are more reminiscent of self-defense martial arts, not combat sports.
Maintenant, si on revient sur la citation de Virgile, leurs poings passent et repassent autour de leurs tempes et de leurs oreilles, et qu'on reprend cet ensemble de gestes. Que se passe-t-il? Eh bien, on remarque qu'effectivement, les poings des combattants gravitent autour de leur tête, aussi bien dans l'attaque que dans la défense. Regardons ça en détail.
Chaque attaque, dans sa préparation, amène
I'd argue the way he holds the guard on the left, he is quite open. The raised hand should be covering the chin, not held so far back.
C'est après tout ce travail d'étude et d'expérimentation qu'on va pouvoir commencer à comprendre cette fresque des boxeurs crétois. Face à une source aussi lacunaire, il n'est pas difficile de tomber dans le piège de la surinterprétation. Il faut donc la recontextualiser grâce aux sources plus complètes à notre disposition.
I mean, you say that while you're trying to interpret a Minoan painting using archaic and classical period vase depictions, Hellenistic gloves, and a Roman poet. That Minoan fresco is as far detached from 2nd century Rome as 2nd century Rome is to us.
Alors, finalement, qu'est-ce qu'elle nous montre, cette fresque? Les bras des combattants sont-ils tendus? Nous venons de voir que, justement, il faut plier les bras pour attaquer et se protéger. Et si c'était plutôt ça, en fait?
Wait a second. So they think the right arm is the one that is ungloved? Let's go back to the original recreation. it becomes even more inaccurate now. Both fighters have the right hand gloved, and this arm is actually in the background, which you can tell from the pearls around the neck. It's his left hand that is extended, not the right.
D'abord, équipons seulement un combattant avec une paire d'imants. Si les deux plient leurs bras, selon la gestuelle qu'on vient de voir, on peut observer une correspondance entre la position peinte sur la fresque et nos boxeurs.
Okay, never mind, but do you guys see the connection with the fresco? Because I do not. If he's defending himself on the right, why is the other hand so low? He's primed to eating an uppercut.
Ils ne sont pas peints en train de se frapper mutuellement, mais dans une action de défense et de préparation d'attaque.
You can see how the skin tone is different from one fighter to the other, so that is certainly not the arm of the left combatant. And why would boxing include one fighter with gloves and the other entirely barehanded? Would it not make more sense that they have their dominant hand gloved and only allow striking with the gloved hand while the ungloved hand is used for defense? And why are we paying so much attention to the Minoan fresco? We have no other sources on Minoan boxing, so whatever conclusions we draw here are going to be incomplete at best. You can't just say ancient is ancient and they all practice boxing the same.
Petit détail intéressant, on remarque par cette interprétation que nos combattants n'ont plus besoin de se partager une paire de gants. Cette répartition asymétrique peut s'expliquer simplement. Lors d'un exercice d'attaque-défense, durant un entraînement, l'attaquant peut enchaîner les coups sans danger de riposte, puisque son partenaire risquerait de se blesser les mains.
Okay, so the answer to my first question is that they're just practicing. But this feeds into the common misconception that getting hit with a gloved fist is fine. It's not fine. These aren't pillows. A punch with a fist will rattle the head whether gloved or ungloved. Also, this is a fresco painting. It's not a vase. One would have to ask why a painter would want to depict a training session. For vases, it makes sense. They're not meant to last, and the image was meant to complement the practical use of the pottery, not necessarily define it. But this is a painting on a wall, which would not have been easy to do, nor the materials readily available.
Sans être une vérité absolue, l'expérimentation offre d'autres clés de compréhension sur des sources parcellaires, qui poseraient autrement des difficultés de restitution.
And this is exactly why experimentation should not be the first step to interpretation. First, you should be compiling, analyzing, interpreting, and then experimenting.
Avec cette première vidéo, nous voulions vous montrer les difficultés que posent certaines sources dans le travail d'expérimentation. Une iconographie incomplète pouvant même mener à des erreurs d'interprétation.
Well, they did prove the point, though arguably unintentionally.
Pour terminer, je vais vous laisser avec une démonstration que nous avons pu filmer dans l'amphithéâtre d'art.
See, I don't find this quite practical in any shape or form. Standing flat-footed and tapping gloves is not what we find in ancient Greek boxing. There's movement, lunges, counters, parries, and a host of different techniques found across many vases. Even in another of their reenactments, where they do move a bit more, we see this tapping of the gloves, the hammer fist being thrown out without purpose, and the overall lack of boxing fundamentals. In fact, there are moments where we see the weakness of how they execute the hammer fist by getting them countered in their own reenactment. My study sampled 140 pottery pieces that specifically show hand strikes in pre-Roman athletic contests. If I were to include mythology, there would be more, and if I were to include Roman-era boxing and Pankration, far, far more. Acta, or anyone else that may watch this video and is interested, there is a database for Roman depictions that you can use if you like to conduct a study of post-Hellenistic hand strike techniques from within the Roman era. That would be a welcome addition to modern literature and an interesting study. This, I'm afraid, simply tries to amplify this notion that older or foreign cultures were weird and had very different styles to what we see today, when in fact there is a great deal that was almost identical to modern boxing. However, because most of it is the same given practicality and biomechanics, the elements that are unique, despite being tested for centuries if not millennia, become much more exciting. Once again, I am writing an academic book on this subject, which I can only do with your help. So check out my Patreon, there is a ton of exclusive content for every tier. Cheers, and I'll catch you on the next video.